Welcome back to Bunny Banter, the first and only podcast for everything Killer Bunnies. I'm your host, Matt. Unfortunately, for the first time, co-host Mikey was unable to join us, but we are honored to have guest Joe Slack on again.
Hello.
So we're going to carry this episode with just the two of us.
I've been
I think
doing
I think we'll
crunches.
be fine.
Oh yeah.
Well, we'll make it. We're on an exciting topic today. What were we talking about, Joe?
We are talking about combination strategies, neutral aggressive.
Yeah, neutral aggressive, the first hybrid strategy. And I think that as far as Killer Bunny strategy goes, I think when people think about Killer Bunny strategy, the first thing I think of is things within the neutral aggressive. I think that's the most common place for people to go as soon as they start realizing that the game has a lot of strategy to it.
Yeah, I'd agree with that. And I think a lot of groups, or at least the group I play in, that's really kind of where the meta balances out. Like we always have like some people go more aggressive, some people go more passive, but it seems right between the neutral aggressive is that's kind of the sweet spot.
Yeah, that's the exciting thing about hybrids in general, honestly. I mean, the passive neutral and the aggressive passive are less tested, of course, but the thing about the neutral aggressive and in theory about all hybrids is that unlike how the pure strategies are more or less a convoluted rock paper scissors relationship, the hybrid strategies don't necessarily fit into that simple breakdown of what counters what. Sometimes these strategies are meant to counter a specific meta, or they might work in multiple very they'll be very flexible to work in several scenarios. So it gets really exciting.
Yeah, yeah, and I think you hit the nail on the head by referring to them as flexible because I mean, if you're playing aggressive, you're kind of locked into aggressive. I mean, unless people are willing to forgive you. But if you could balance it right, you can kind of maybe lean aggressive for a while, then lean back towards a more neutral or passive. I think if you pull it off, it puts you in a great spot.
For sure, yeah. So let's get right into it here. So the thing about these hybrids is we can define them in two ways, and we actually put some strategies into both definitions. We can either define a hybrid as taking aspects from multiple of the strategies, or we can define a hybrid as using multiple strategies from each category at once. So just going right into it, let's take one that uses multiple aspects from the strategies. And I think it's a very common strategy here. I like to call it the holier than thou strategy of neutral aggressive. So the idea is it's an economic and targeted strategy in which the player overemphasizes the economic status of an opponent while underemphasizing his own. So let's give an example just to make sure we know where we're going with that. Imagine the difficulty mid-game of deciding which is more dangerous. Is my opponent's triplet more dangerous? Or is this other opponent's red gleeful bunny more dangerous? Which one's the bigger threat? If one of those opponents is using the holier than thou strategy, they will make sure to emphasize, let's say the player with a triplet, the player with the triplet will emphasize the danger of the red gleeful bunny. And they will completely demonstrate all the dangers. That person's going to get way too much money. They're going to get all the defense cards and they're going to become immortal. Very big threat. Well, meanwhile, they'll make sure to mention that triplets are very common in full sets, and it's not actually threatening, even if they are the player with the only triplet. How often have you seen this strategy, Joe?
Every single time I play, maybe. I think maybe we just end up arguing about who is bigger of a threat when we all just want it to not be us who is perceived as the threat. It's pretty common, I think.
Yeah, very, very true, very true. I think that this is the main strategy. This is like the cornerstone strategy of several Killer Bunnies groups, where as soon as they realize this strategy, they're like, "Oh my goodness, this game is epic. There's so much strategy going on, so much manipulation. It's amazing. It's a very
Oh,
much
for sure.
cornerstone strategy to any group delving into this strategy side of the game. if
For
your
sure.
opponents if your opponents don't realize what you're doing, oh, you're going to get away with a lot with this. Yeah, it's a very exciting one. Holier than thou, very much proven to be a really good strategy. Very effective in several situations. I have a few subcategories here, like I usually do, such as one I call "Burn at the Stake," which is where you as one player exclusively target another player, and this will be typically used against a player who's known to use the pure aggressive strategy. So this is the hard counter to that, where all of a sudden you have full justification, if you can get away with it, to exclusively target that opponent, and they really can't do anything about it. Or at least it would seem. Have you ever seen that one, Joe?
Yeah, I definitely have. And I would say it's probably one step more towards toxic. Not it's just a little, right? Because you're picking somebody who is the aggressive player, or maybe appears to be the aggressive player, uh, and calling them out and trying to put as much focus on them as possible. It can be effective, but it can be toxic as well.
Oh yes, I agree very much that this one can very quickly become toxic. Uh, Long before I defined the passivity meta, I would put what I did. I played a lot of neutral aggressive a few years ago, and I would put what I did to my friend Luke under this burn at the stake category, because all of a sudden I started realizing the game was a bunch of strategy, and Luke was a pure aggressive player, as were most of us at that time. So I started using neutral aggressive, and eventually I transitioned into this burn at the stake. And since then, he's on a 3-year losing streak,
Oh
continuing.
no!
mainly
Oh
because
no!
mainly because he hasn't played the game for a while. Perhaps that demonstrates exactly how toxic this can become, where all of a sudden one player is just not allowed to win. And that feels pretty bad.
Yeah, that does not feel good. That's for sure.
So yes, I can't recommend using the burn at the stake strategy, but there is another one here that is similar but is more temporary, and I like to call that one Deus Vult, obviously referring to the Crusades. So it's a holier than thou in which a player leads an alliance, emphasis on that the alliance is presumed to be temporary against the aggressive opponents. So if one player, this is more while Burn at the Stake is takes place over multiple games. Deus Vault is more so applied in a single game setting where one player has just been dominating the whole game and everyone just agrees together to just wipe out this one player. And they're probably going to lose that game, but there probably won't be any ramifications in future games, is the idea. Now, it sometimes can become burning at the stake in future games, but it can get toxic as well. Have you ever seen that one, Joe?
This one, yes, I like to do this one where, because it's almost like you're masking an aggressive move by saying, no, 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 I'm doing a good thing. I'm helping all of us work together to defeat the bad guy. But really, you're kind of building up into an aggressive move, but people aren't perceiving you as aggressive as much. I think it's a great strategy.
Oh yeah, it's quite effective if you these types of strategies, holier than thou, really requires that you have there is some reputation to it where you have to be somewhat trustworthy, I guess you
Oh
could
yeah,
say.
this won't
Where
work for me anymore.
yeah, where they have to believe you when you say that they're a threat. If you start getting questioned, this strategy will not work for you anymore. Uh,
Yeah, pretty much for me, it's hey, that guy's a threat. Oh, you're saying he's a threat. You must be a threat.
Yeah, it's yeah, exactly. It can completely backfire on you if you overuse it. But yeah, there is some interesting differences between these subcategories where the first, just holier than thou, more so you're not necessarily actually attacking the opponent yourself. It's more so most commonly used as an out to not be targeted. So that's kind of the neutral aspect of it, where you don't actually want to be a target, but you still have the high value cards of aggressive. So that's where we get the hybrid from. You have high value, which is aggressive, and you don't want to be a target, which is neutral.
Yeah.
So yeah, the original strategy, holier than thou, is more so used, at least from my experience, used when another opponent is thinking about targeting someone with a weapon, and you just casually recommend that they target the other opponent. Just very, very subtly. Maybe the other opponent's not even paying attention. Maybe they don't notice. I think that's the optimal case.
Oh, for
because,
sure.
because then all of a sudden that other opponent will retaliate against the first player, and all of a sudden you get away home free. Which is excellent. But yeah, the subcategories of it are more so you're actually doing the targeting yourself, and you're justifying your actions. At least you're trying to.
As long as it sounds reasonable, that's all that matters.
Exactly, yeah. It's all about sounding reasonable. Is there anything else we wanted to say on holier than thou before we move on to another strategy here? Because we have quite a few that we can cover.
Yeah, no, I don't think so.
Okay, yeah. Very, very proven strategy. Excellent strategy to try out for anyone looking to try some neutral aggressive. Let's move into one of the strategies that we consider a combination between a strategy from aggressive and a strategy from neutral. So the difference here is you can separate these two strategies and play them independently in the pure aggressive or pure neutral, but they do work nicely. They synergize with each other in combination. So let's take a very common one here. Carrot acceleration from aggressive, which, reminder, you can go back and look at the aggressive episode if you want more information. But carrot acceleration is the idea of just min-maxing to maximize your carrot count. Very, very standard strategy. And then the hermit strategy from neutral, which is the idea of avoiding the social interaction aspects of the game. So in combination, all of a sudden you have been maximizing your carrots, and also everyone's kind of ignoring you. Have you ever seen this strategy work, Joe?
Yeah, I think when you have a bunch of people who are playing are loud and more towards the aggressive side, and you're just quietly building up your carrots, that is like the perfect time to do this, because everyone kind of forgets you're there. Maybe throw in a wait. How does this game work again in the middle of there? So people, oh yeah, they're not a threat. Don't even look at them. Which yeah, so I think it could be great actually.
Oh, I love the addition you added there of saying, how do I play this game?
Oh
then
yeah.
you're hustling them.
Oh, for sure. That is like my wife's go-to strategy.
Oh, that's amazing. I love it. I love it. I wish I could get away with that one. Everyone
Right?
everyone knows I have the reputation of the person who knows the game so well, so I can't use that one myself. But I'm going to be watching for that one. Oh, that's pretty great. I think this one works really well in very specific groups because depending on the group you're in, although carrot count would seem to be the standard way of deciding who is winning, there are some groups where they will more or less ignore carrot count, and they'll look more towards the threat of something like the aggressive's freight train, where this player is getting a lot of tempo. They have a triplet, they have a rank, which of course is threatening, and that player is winning. But when that player is in the game, someone focusing on the freight train strategy of aggressive, all of a sudden you can get away with quite a bit by using carrot acceleration plus hermit, because people aren't necessarily going to be looking at your carrot count. This works especially well with the card from Creature feature, Kelpies, where your carrot count is even public information.
Well, I gotta look that card up here. I didn't even
Oh
like
yeah,
that one.
that's the one that you get to hide all of your save specials and carrots underneath the card. So all of a sudden you have this
Oh.
stack of cards that aren't public information. Some of them might be special, some of them might be carrots. Your opponents really don't know unless they've been keeping track. One of my
Oh.
favorite cards from Creature feature.
Wow, and that's not even an aggressive card. So even if you don't have bunnies.
Yeah, it's a save special. As
Oh
long as you have the
boy.
special saved, you can use this strategy very effectively, because all of a sudden either you have a lot of specials and that you're really someone they don't want to be dealing with, or you have a lot of carrots, or you have something in between. And are they going to take the risk? Have they been paying enough attention? Probably not in a game with a large player count, they haven't.
Maybe if you have that card too, and you're like, oh, I'm just gonna save another special card. Oh, let me just save this special card, and you quietly throw a few carrots in there. Don't really call it out.
Yeah,
That could
exactly.
work pretty well.
Yeah, make sure to name the specials as you're saving them so that the opponents who are paying attention at least a little bit will realize that, oh, if I attack this opponent, they have the Monumental Matt Baker to retaliate. I don't want to mess with them. Oh, they have Reversal of Fortune. Oh, no. Well, maybe they didn't save that one because they kept it in their hand because they're smart. But maybe they did. Oh, my goodness. That's scary. You don't know how many carrots they have. Unless they're non-stealthily looking through their carrots, but make sure if you have Kelpies to be stealthy about it. It's not public information. You don't need to share it with anyone.
I mean, it doesn't say on the card that when they go to the bathroom you can't look at a card. So I'm just saying.
It doesn't say on the card. It also doesn't say on the cards that I can't flip the table when I lose
Exactly.
It. But that's an aside there. Literal interpretation of the rules, or
Yeah. Nobody asked Jeff to clarify that, guys. I need to hang on to this.
It reminds me of this was several years ago. But one time I was playing a 3-player game, and this could actually be classified as this would actually, it wasn't intentional, but it would fall under the really toxic aggressive strategy of political house rules. Where if you don't like how the card works, you vote on it.
Oh.
So,
I don't like that at all.
Oh no, it's absolutely toxic, terrible for the community. But it wasn't intentional. They actually misunderstood the card. What happened was it was a 3-player game, and I played Feed Now or Die. It's feed the bunny becomes a feed immediately situation. If they don't have the cabbage or water, the bunny's going to starve to death. Pretty standard. However, they thought that during my turn, they could play a Prune Danish, which is a save special, of course.
Yeah.
And they said they used the argument. One of them used the argument first, and the other agreed, foolishly, that obviously the bunny wouldn't just sit there and stare at the Danish and not eat it. So obviously I can use the saved Prune Danish during my opponent's turn. It doesn't say that I can't.
Yeah.
Even though directly in the rule books the definition of a special card says that you can't because you can only play it during your turn.
Oh yeah, it definitely says you can't.
Oh yeah. So that was a bit funny. It reminded me of that situation, but that was a bit of an aside there.
Yeah.
Anyways, Carrot Acceleration plus Hermit, very, very strong strategy, I would say. If you're in any group that more or less ignores carrot counts, which is more groups than you would think, I would say.
And I mean, the more carrots you have, the easier it is to just ignore your carrot count, right?
Yeah. If you carrots are public information, but if you casually stack them all on top of each other instead of spreading them out, what are they going to do about it? You can do the same with Dala. Whenever my stack of Dala always has the lowest value on top.
Oh, of course.
If they see the 10 on top, they're going to target me for sure. But if they see the 1 on top or the $half on top, nobody's going to target me for that.
Exactly.
It's public information. They could ask for it at any time. Same goes for carrot counts. But, if they don't ask for it, I'm not going to tell them.
For sure.
Yeah.
That's their business task.
Yeah. I think that's a great transition into one of my favorite to use neutral aggressive strategies. Again, in the category of taking aspects from multiple strategies, hidden investments. It is an economic strategy in which the player accumulates a large economic status in sources typically ignored or forgotten by opponents. So this is exactly what we were just talking about, where opponents might not necessarily, depending on the group, very dependent upon the group, pay attention to how much Dala you have. That's the simple case. Joe, in your groups that you play in, do they target a player because of a large dollar count?
For a large dollar account, oh, for sure. Well, I mean, that's perfect chance to extort some money out of them too.
Very true. Yeah. Yeah. Like I said, it's very dependent upon the group, and there's different ways you can apply the strategy. But in some groups, especially groups, there's a lot of aspects to the game. You have the bunny circle, you have carrots, you have save specials. Most players, if they're not overly experienced, will not be able to focus on every aspect of the game, so they might focus more on the bunny circle and saying, okay, this player has a triplet at a rank, I need to target them. Other players will focus more on carrot counts and will say, this player has 15 carrots, I only have 5, I need to target that player to make sure that they don't have a bunny at the end. Other groups might focus on dollar counts and say, this player has a really good end game state, so I need to target them to make sure that they don't have enough dollar to end the game by buying the rest of the carrots. It really depends on the group, and of course, an optimal player would focus on all of those and take everything into consideration. But that's not going to happen in an 8-player game with
Oh
7
yeah,
opponents to keep track of. So,
and I think it's. Oh, go ahead. Sorry.
you go ahead. Go ahead.
I was just gonna say, and I think it's worth noting in that case too. The group I play with, we've been playing for a couple of years, so I think we're all pretty reasonably similarly skilled, and so I think that's why maybe this strategy isn't really as viable in our group.
Very true, very true. At least in the case of save dollar, that's the very very simple case to demonstrate what the hidden investments looks like. The cases that I've been using more recently, and specifically in Remix, but also in Full Set, I can give a case here where my brother would use it actually. It was a game we just played it before Thanksgiving, where there were maybe 20, 30 carrots left in the draw pile, and all of a sudden, my brother played the half price coupon from the hand and ended the game.
Oh, nice.
That is an excellent example of hidden investments because, strictly speaking, there's very few opportunities to look at your opponent's hand. And less than not very many opportunities to disrupt their hand either, or even to know that you should disrupt their hand. So the hidden investment strategy that uses the hand is even more powerful because all of a sudden, if you have something like the half price coupon in Full Set, or if you're playing something like Remix, I play quite a bit of Killer Bunnies Remix. It's no longer in stock, unfortunately. But in that game, in Remix, I always save the Super Supply Surprise in my hand. And hopefully nobody bought the blue pawn yet, because I don't want to buy it before the hand, otherwise people would suspect something. So on a turn where I'm about to end the game, or I don't look close to the end of the game, but all of a sudden I purchase the blue pawn for $5, and then I play the super supplies from hand, play it twice, and probably get enough carrots and dollar to end the game. It's just instant. They can't do anything about it.
That's awesome.
And the best thing about it is that realistically, the only counter to the hidden investments from hand, besides just random disruption that happens, some way drew Ultimate Chaos from Fantastic Booster, whatever. Things like that happen, but not very common. But the only real counter that consistently can occur is to be able to read your opponent very well. So if you're playing with the hidden investments, there is an aspect of you have to have a good poker face.
Oh yeah.
You cannot reveal that you have the super supplies or the half price coupon in hand. If you do, it's over. They've realized what you have, and they're going to start targeting you very excessively because all of a sudden you have twice the economic status than people thought you had, or 3 times in some cases.
Yeah, I think I have a poker face, but the people who know how to read me just completely take advantage of me.
Oh yeah, it's a very difficult skill to learn, and if you do have a good poker face, there is one more hard counter, and that's to be really good at hand tracking. Because if you see that your opponent has kept a card from the orange booster in their hand for a long time, I mean a long time, perhaps that's the super supply surprise or something along those lines, where it'll be something like that. It'll be some high value card that they're trying to save. And you can figure out that they have that. Maybe you call them out on it. If you blatantly call them out on it, maybe they'll lose their poker face, and then the whole group will know. Or you can just suggest to the group, throw hints here and there. But that's a very difficult, very high skill thing to do, to hand tracking Killer Bunnies.
You know what you can do is in that situation, if you see him holding that card, just point blank, hey, is that super supplies in your hand?
Yeah.
No, it's not. Okay, what orange card are you holding right now? And watch him stumble to try to remember what other orange cards there are in the deck. Then you know they're lying.
Yeah, in some ways it relates back to, we didn't talk about in the neutral discussion, but there is a neutral strategy that we call prophecy. And it's where the player correctly predicts future outcomes in order to spook or excite their opponents. And whether or not they actually have the spiritual gift of prophecy is irrelevant to the strategy. It makes it more consistent. But if you can read your opponent so well that you can predict exactly what they have at a certain point, they get really spooked. I've done it. And a lot of that's very high skill stuff to be able to read your opponents that well. I haven't been able to do it in full set, but back in the days when I played quite a bit of starter sets, or when I'm playing quite a bit of remix at a time, I'm able to decently read my opponents. I'm like, oh, my opponent just bought the violet pawn. They have exactly a mystery urn. I just look at their hand, look at the red card. I'm like, okay, they have mystery urn right there. And then once they have it as a top run, I say to them, that's mystery urn. Things like that. You can, or maybe it's more subconscious. Over the summer I played remix with a couple friends of mine quite a bit, and I thought to myself, I'm going to try to get better at reading my opponents. So subconsciously, I thought about what would my opponent play in this situation, because I know him pretty well, and some strategies are easier to read than others. And I thought to myself exactly, okay, that card's a level 3 weapon, and that card's a bunny, and there it was right there.
Oh
Level
my
3
goodness.
weapon bunny. I'm like, oh! I didn't know I was that good. So I have no idea where that information came from. It was either subconscious or maybe I had a prophetic moment, but there is an aspect to that. That's the counter to the hidden investments from the hand. That's the main point here, is that it's a very difficult, very high skill is required to be able to counter this strategy. The downside of hidden investments is that you actually have to have good cards to start with.
That's true.
You have to get half price coupon, or you have to get the super surprise, or anything along that caliber, where all of a sudden you can just play it down right away. And sometimes it doesn't happen. I had a really good hidden investments hand a few days ago in a full set game, and it was with Mikey and Frank. They've both Mikey's co-host, of course, but Frank's guested on the passive episode, so everyone probably remembers him from 2 weeks ago. And so I had the perfect hidden investments hand, and all of a sudden Mikey plays switcheroo, which also switches hands.
Oh.
Oh, feels bad. So the disruption, hand disruption, is a huge counter to this, because you could have played all those high value cards, but you lost the opportunity as soon as they disrupt your hand.
And I think you mentioned this before, but they're really, like, maybe in the future there'll be more hand disruption options, but now there's only very few. But maybe that's good. I mean, hand disruption can be huge.
It definitely can be, especially the cards that have the caliber of swapping hands, like switcheroo. Switcheroo is a good example. Although that also switches places, that's even more disruptive. Let's see, what else do we have? We have Delinquent Miners is the one I've never seen played, because that one you have to be under the age of 18 to use. But without any dice roll or anything, if you're under the age of 18, Delinquent Miners, you can swap an entire hand. And that is huge value against the hidden investments opponent. If you know an opponent often uses hidden investments, and you've noticed that they've been playing passive for a while, and they don't usually play passive. That's the other tell here for reading your opponents. If they're playing passive, they don't usually play passive, they're probably using hidden investments.
Oh, for sure.
So if you have the opportunity to swap hands with them, all of a sudden you've set up your hand perfectly to the complete opposite of hand investments. You've saved all your low value cards in your hand, and you swap your low value hand for a high value hand, and that's a huge swing. Can be absolutely devastating in certain scenarios. Other disruption cards that are more consistent would be things like Against All Odds was one that came out recently, forced every opponent to discard a card that ends in an odd number. That could disrupt them. Scarlet Letter, that could make them discard all their run cards in their hand. If you expect they have something like Atlas Shrugged saved up, which I also had in that game. Or Half Price Coupon that starts with A, so Scarlet Letter can also discard the Half Price Coupon that has an A in it. It has huge impacts, these hand disruption cards, and I think in the uneducated groups or inexperienced groups perhaps, they don't necessarily realize the value of hand disruption, because if you use it incorrectly, you're actually helping your opponents. You're actually helping them cycle, and then they're actually supporting hidden investments because all of a sudden they had all low value cards and you made them draw medium to high value cards. So yes, excellent, very exciting strategy, hidden investments is. It's one of my favorite neutral aggressive strategies to use whenever I'm playing neutral aggressive, because when I'm playing Killer Bunnies, I like to experiment a lot with different strategies, and everyone knows this. So if I'm playing passive, they're not necessarily going to expect anything.
Oh, nice.
So I have the reputation as someone who experiments with so many different strategies and plays a large variety, that I can play what seems like pure passive, but in reality I'm being neutral aggressive the whole time. There was a recent game where I actually was planning on playing pure passive, and all of a sudden I drew Ice 9 and I drew Super Supplies. I'm like, okay, here we go.
Oh, nice.
Here we go. It was a remix game, so it's not quite as impactful as it usually would be, but still it was enough to end the game with, I don't know, 10 out of 15 carrots in a 3-player game.
Oh, nice.
Yeah, so it's very effective if used correctly, and it's very difficult to if you're a hard opponent to read, or if you're an inconsistent opponent, highly recommend hidden investments. Okay, let's go back to a combination strategy, which uses a strategy from neutral and a strategy from aggressive. Let's take another really common one here. The backstab from aggressive, plus the just war from neutral. So a quick reminder, backstab is exactly what it sounds like. You had an agreement or an alliance with an opponent, and you break that alliance. The just war is a temporary alliance from neutral that one opponent is being too aggressive, so you form a temporary emphasis on that it's a justified war, so you're not going to excessively retaliate, unlike Deo's fault. But this is so
you're not going to salt their fields. You're just going to attack them.
Yeah, exactly. You're not going to completely eliminate them from the game. You just make sure that they're brought back down to a normal level. You know, just make it fair. You know, neutral's about being fair in some cases. So I think the most common scenario where you'll see this strategy is in relation and as a direct counter to the non-aggression pact from aggressive. So the non-aggression pact is an alliance where two aggressive opponents will decide that they're not going to target each other. And yes, you could use backstab as a direct counter to that, but perhaps you'll look like you're even more aggressive than you intend to look. But if you add just war to it, if you get everyone else to also join in on the fight, all of a sudden you look like the hero. I mean, you were committing such terrible sins that you are now repenting of from playing the aggressive non-aggression pact, and you are now repenting from that and want to bring judgment upon this terrible aggressive opponent. You've been saved from your aggressive ways. These neutral opponents that you're teaming up with now have convinced you to attack this aggressive opponent. So you are now justified, right?
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, it's justified. Definitely no malicious intentions in this strategy whatsoever. How often do you see this one, Joe?
You know, this podcast has made me realize our group is very, very aggressive. Because I mean, a backstab is barely even aggressive anymore. That's just like, oh, you backstabbed me. What a surprise!
That's pretty great.
I
Yeah,
mean, you're almost expecting if you're working together when is the backstab coming so we can prepare for it. But I love it. I love the backstabbing and the plotting and the scheming, and I think this strategy just fits perfectly into really what makes Killer Bunnies so unique as a game and just so much fun.
oh yeah, very true. It's always fun to hear about different groups because my group's kind of in a weird state right now. We were in a passive meta for quite a while, and now we're actually Frank, the notorious passive player, has been playing a pure neutral strategy for quite a while, and even he played neutral aggressive for one game. I was spooked. So we're transitioning to the aggressive meta, and I'm watching Tyler, who will be guesting on the aggressive passive, has been using a really good aggressive passive hybrid to encourage that transition because he likes to play aggressive and passive. He's got experience with both of those categories, which is an odd combination for a player to be good at aggressive and passive strategies, but never using the neutral strategies that much.
Yeah,
So
that is pretty unique.
that's fun to watch. I think I had some influence in that since I was telling him so much about the aggressive passive once I discovered it. But yeah, that's a whole nother episode. We're talking about backstab plus just war. Backstab, great counter to the non-aggression pact, and it's the entire reason non-aggression pacts usually aren't viable. They can be viable if they're not broken.
Oh yeah.
And they can be really toxic if not broken.
You,
If you're
you
playing
know,
anything less than a 5-player game and you're doing a non-aggression pact, it gets pretty toxic.
and I think to try to keep the toxicity to a minimum, whenever I get into a non-aggression pact, I like to just say, "Hey, just so you know, I'm gonna betray you. Like at some point here, like you might have like something I want, and I'm just gonna take it. So just be ready for that."
Yeah, in some ways that that promise of a backstab in some ways makes you more neutral aggressive in that application of the non-aggression pact because the whole you're kind of you're saying that it makes the non-aggression pact temporary, which
Exactly.
in some ways makes it more neutral aggressive and therefore more justified in the eyes of some,
Yeah.
which is the whole that's a lot of what neutral aggressive philosophy comes down to is am I justified in this aggressive action? Which is
Exactly.
backstab plus just war. The whole idea is do my other opponents agree that I am justified in breaking this alliance? Because if I just break it without gaining their support, I'm going to look like the greater enemy there.
Oh yeah, that puts you in a bad spot.
Oh yeah, which uh, short term it could be a really good spot, but for the
Yeah,
rest of the
short term.
game, nobody's going to make another agreement with you. You're going to be in bad shape. Of course, it depends on the severity of the backstab. There are some harmless ones. I do a few harmless false trades here and there, sometimes subconsciously, and that's really scary. Recently, I've been doing quite a few subconscious false trades. Which does that count as neutral aggressive if I didn't even know I was false trading?
I don't know.
I don't know.
Yeah, that's almost getting into
I don't know how
philosophy.
to play this game.
It's my first time playing. See,
Yeah.
that's what you do. You have Mikey bring the game, right? And then you're like, "Oh, what is this? Killer Bunnies?"
Yeah, what is this? Yeah. Anytime a new expansion comes out, oh, I didn't study these cards beforehand. No, I haven't thought of strategies. What does this card do? Oh, try to play that here. That's kind of when I'm subconsciously false trading. It could be considered neutral aggressive because all of a sudden I've done this really aggressive thing. An example I'll give that just happened recently within the past month. I can't remember if I brought it up in a previous episode. I had Mad Binding Disease on me for quite a while, and I'd forgotten about it. And
Oh no.
I was playing Kinder Protection Services, a very my staple aggressive passive strategy, very toxic. And I was realizing, as aggressive passive players do, with reputation based strategies, that I was looking too aggressive because I had my triplet, I had my rank, and then I had my array of Kinder Bunnies. So obviously everyone's don't kill my Kinder Bunnies. This other stuff. I decided, you know what? I'm going to trade away all my triplets and all my ranks. I'll just give them away. I'll just king make a little bit. You know, king making is a passive strategy, a toxic one, but a passive strategy nonetheless. I'll just king make this opponent, make things interesting. I had forgotten I had mad bind disease, so I just gave my opponents 6 infected bunnies for their next 10 carrots. 10 carrots!
Oh.
It's like all of a sudden I'm getting 10 free carrots. I got rid of my bunnies, so now I look passive. And in reality, it was a false trade because they ended up having to kill all of those bunnies just to get rid of them. I was
That's
like,
one of those power moves,
oh.
though. If you could do it, you gotta do it.
I mean, yeah, that would have been an excellent false trade, but I did subconsciously. So I guess in some ways I was neutral aggressive because I didn't
Yeah,
realize
exactly.
I didn't know what I was doing.
Exactly.
Yeah,
Exactly.
I don't know how to play this game, you know. I don't know what I'm doing. I just do this podcast and I just think of things and I
You just
was
read the rules real closely and imagine what it would be like.
yeah. Yeah, so that's always fun. So a lot of we've talked about quite a bit of neutral aggressive philosophy that has to do with holier than thou, backs of just war, even carrot acceleration, hermit, and investments. They all somewhat have to do with am I justified in these actions? Let's see, which ones should we do next? I want to avoid that top one there because I think it's a bit toxic. The beginner's misfortune. I'm not going to. Well, maybe we could.
Yeah,
Maybe
it's
we could.
toxic.
Yeah,
We could talk about
we
it.
could talk about. That's actually
We could. Well, how about we talk about, it, but we don't advocate it.
yes. Okay, we can do that. So this one, beginner's misfortune, was inspired by someone in the Discord. I can't remember who, but they described. This was during a discussion about the game, talking about how the game is primarily strategy, while a lot of inexperienced players will think that it's primarily luck. So the beginner's misfortune strategy, I'm not going to talk about the subcategory of it because I think that's even more toxic and bad for the community. The beginner's misfortune strategy is when you, as the experienced player, convince or perhaps don't correct your opponents that think the game is primarily determined by luck. So the idea here is if your opponents think that you were lucky to win, great. Let them think that. That's to your benefit because they're not going to target you because of it. What do you think, Joe? Have you ever seen this one?
I don't think I've seen it. One thing you said though, I think I want to split apart a little bit. Convincing someone that the game is luck based is like
That's more toxic. Yeah, that's
that's
ultimate
terrible.
toxic. Oh,
It's
yeah.
awful. But if they think it's a luck based game, well, just prove them wrong. You know, just
Yeah.
destroy them, and now they know it's not.
Yeah. I think that's basically what I did to Luke, and that's why he's on a 3-year losing streak. Which
Yeah, that's not toxic
you
at
know
all.
that was back in the day where I miss my 14 game win streaks. You know, I don't get those anymore. It's like me sharing strategies. That's to all of your guys' benefit. I could have just left the community be and not resurrected it and just let everyone think the game is all luck and a dying game. But no. I gave up my 14 game win streaks for this, but that's okay. Yeah, I can think of. I'm going to share. There was another situation that this strategy can come up, which same person, Luke, friend Luke, and Chris. Chris, of course, we know he's guested on Bunny Banter, knows the passivity meta very well. Excellent neutral aggressive player. Plays the strategy very well. You know, I already mentioned his excellent use of hidden investments. He also had an excellent use of beginner's misfortune, which I cannot necessarily advocate. But it was a 3-player game with Luke, and Luke, believing the game is all luck and very stubborn on it, on a 1.5 year losing streak at this point in time, was complaining about the luck that he'd been having. You know, he's not drawing good cards and all of that. And Chris, very sneakily, in neutral aggressive philosophy, agrees with him. And therefore, they have formed an implied non-aggression pact. And they are justified, and I can't do anything about it. And Chris won that game.
Nice.
By a landslide. Because he was able to use his knowledge of strategy to leave Luke in his ignorance and thinking the game was luck based, and I was targeted by both.
Nice.
So I do not advocate the beginner's misfortune strategy. I certainly do not advocate the subcategory of it that shall not be mentioned, because it is even farther along the toxic line and is terrible for the community. In fact, I think it's one of the reasons the community died somewhat in the first place, the old community. But this strategy, it is very effective. Don't use it, please.
Yeah, exactly. Not
You're
advocated by
harmful
Banter.
for the community. Do not use beginner's misfortune. It is very sinister. But it will give you 12-game win streaks.
Yeah, 12-game win streaks.
Yeah.
But you won't have anyone to play against.
Very true. Yeah,
Therefore, you'll
lose
never
all your,
lose your streak.
you'll lose all your friends. Yeah.
Yeah, who needs friends?
Hey, good
All
way
right.
to get rid of friends. There you go. There's better ways. There's better
Oh,
ways
there
within
you
Killer
go.
Bunnies. You know, just use the Nigerian prince strategy or full
Okay.
cutthroat. Full cutthroat's where it's at. Oh my goodness, full cutthroat. Okay, moving on. Let's go to another strategy that we can actually advocate. Let me check how we are in time for a bit. Yeah, we're good. Still have quite a few strategies we can discuss here. Another combination strategy, the perfect top deck of neutral, which, as a reminder, is a pretty new strategy, where instead of picking which cards you play down in which order, you play the cards as you draw them. So then you don't control the order of your cards. Quite a few psychological benefits, and it works much better than you'd expect. And then combine that with the aggressive strategy of Freight Train. So the idea here is, with the perfect top deck, there is the psychological interaction with your opponents that you're going to be more justified in the cards that you play because you had no choice in the matter, more or less. So therefore, you can justify the use of the aggressive strategy of Freight Train, which is having excessive tempo. You know, having your triplet, having your rank. Joe, have you ever seen this strategy? I'd be surprised if you did.
No, I honestly haven't. I don't think I've actually even seen someone do the perfect top deck either.
Yeah, it's a pretty new strategy within the past couple of months that my tabletop club group discovered.
Yeah. So is part of this? Are you like saying or implying you're playing every single card as you draw them, but in
You can do it in that context.
Okay.
Yeah, and that's usually what you have to do to justify the perfect top deck. So then, you know, if you get something really aggressive like the nuclear warhead, you can say, I didn't have a choice in the matter, guys. It just happened that way. You know, making sure that your opponents know that your hand was forced. Clearly, you couldn't have switched your strategy and discard the card. That wasn't an option, clearly.
You gotta be honest.
The perfect top. I think I mentioned this in the neutral discussion, but the perfect top deck was inspired by another person in the Discord who mentioned that sometimes, rather than choosing their cards, they'll just draw a card from the top without looking and set it down. Obviously checking if it's misfortune after the fact. But then they are justified in that they didn't have a choice in the matter. There's other psychological benefits as well, such as, mechanical benefits of you no longer have to spend time choosing cards. So you have the benefits of delay of game is often considered aggressive. So now your turns are the fastest turns there are, and everyone loves you. Let's see what else. Now that you no longer have to focus on your strategy of which cards to play, you have more mental capability to hand track and things like that. A whole lot of benefits that you would not expect. And that's why the strategy actually works. Frank has been using the pure neutral perfect top deck a lot recently. It's been very effective for him. But yeah, in combination with the freight train, it's all of a sudden a neutral aggressive strategy where you didn't have any choice in the matter. You just happened to get the triplets and the rank, and you're making sure it's a little bit of holier than thou as well, where you're making sure to say, oh, my triplet, I didn't have any choice in it, but my opponent's triplet over there, he was
He's
very
choosing
intentional
it.
with playing that. He has a plan. I don't know what I'm playing. I mean, you do know because you looked at your cards to make sure they're not misfortunes, but you don't really know what you're doing. I don't know how to play this game. I'm just playing random cards.
I've never played this before.
I've never played this before. It's a lot of that philosophy, and you get away with quite a lot in certain groups by doing that. It's a pretty exciting strategy. I'd let's see. Do I want to recommend using the perfect top deck? Try it out. See if you like it. Frank has altered it a little bit because when you're working on strategies, you want to make sure not to tunnel vision. What Frank will do is he'll perfect top deck until he loses all of his bunnies, and then he'll corrupt the top deck, and we'll make sure bunnies coming up next. It's just to make sure that his top decks are actually playable. So that's a slight variant I'd recommend, and make sure to do it stealthily so that your opponents don't notice. Otherwise, you might not be justified anymore. Okay, moving on. Let's talk about the traveling salesman. That's a strategy I'm pretty excited about. So the traveling salesman is another one of those that takes aspects from each, and it's an economic strategy in which the player offers seemingly fair trades based on objective or relative value, where the other is more applicable. So for example, the objective value of a bunny is 10. The objective value of a carrot is 10. If I don't have a bunny to play my choose a carrot card, I will ask for a bunny from my opponents so that I can play the card and give them the carrot. So I got a bunny out of the deal and they got a carrot out of the deal. That's a fair trade, right?
Yeah.
Right?
Right.
Yeah, probably not. The problem with that trade is it based it off objective value, which is fair. That is a completely fair way to judge the value of cards. However, how much extra besides the objective 10 is that bunny worth to you? All of a sudden, you have a bunny. Most cards in the game require playing bunnies. Without that bunny, your entire hand is worthless.
Oh,
Well,
yeah.
your opponent just got one carrot out of the deal, which the one carrot's worth one carrot. The carrot's not worth anything to the end of the game. Maybe they needed the extra bunny. How much are you actually getting out of the objective value? When is objective value correct to use? And when is relative value correct to use? And how does relative value calculated? And how is objective value calculated? Those are very complex calculations, which is why the traveling salesman works extremely well. Because nobody in their right mind, which I'm not in my right mind, is going to know and understand those calculations. So all of a sudden, if you're convincing enough with a traveling salesman, and it's definitely more so a knowledge-based strategy than a reputation-based strategy. You have to have knowledge of what's actually fair, and then make the trades in your favor. What if you offer your opponent 5 cabbage so that they're able to feed their bunny? The bunny is worth 10. So if you offer them 5 cabbage, I think 8 is a generous price. Because now they're able to save their bunny, right? $8. I think so. Yeah, that's a fair price. And you make sure to mention that they're getting a generous offer out of the deal. The bunny would have normally been worth 10. They didn't want to buy that bracket bunny. They can just spend 8 instead.
Yeah.
Now, in reality, let's actually do the calculation on that. Cabbage is usually worth 1 each. So the 5 cabbage was worth objectively 5. So even in the objective trade, they still got ripped off. But even more so, when you're giving something to your opponent, it is very different than if you were discarding it. If I spend $10 to resurrect my bunny compared to me giving my opponent $5 for a bunny, it's actually, unless you're in an alliance of some sort, about equal. Because I lose $5 and my opponent gains $5, that's a net worth of 10, as opposed to me losing $10, which is a net worth of 10. In some ways. Because what can my opponent do with $5? The discard can't do anything with $5. But what can my opponent do with $5? Very malicious things, perhaps. So with that knowledge, the traveling salesman is allowed to get away with a lot. Have you ever seen this strategy, Joe?
Kind of. I think when you're talking about like objective versus subjective value, whenever somebody offers you a trade, and if you look at the objective values, like, hey, I'll give you 2 carrots if you give me a bunny, you should be immediately suspicious. Because subjectively, what's the next card in their hand? Is it a draw 3 carrots maybe? Or is it something very, very nasty?
Yeah, it especially becomes difficult when the strategy becomes stronger if that player has a reputation of sometimes playing passive. Because all of a sudden they're giving you a generous trade, and generous trades are passive, right? But in reality, this traveling salesman is using the incorrect measurements to determine fair trades.
Exactly.
Happens quite often while playing Monopoly. Oh, I'll give you the boardwalk and the green for the yellow and the orange. When in reality, Monopoly, mathematically speaking, the orange and yellow properties are the best to have monopolies in, and the boardwalk and the greens are absolutely worthless, more or less.
I mean, Monopoly, mathematically speaking, belongs in the garbage can.
Fair point.
But that's just my opinion, man. I mean, if you like Monopoly, that's fine. No, not offending anyone listening. I'm sorry.
I'm okay with Monopoly. I get PTSD from Cheater's Monopoly.
Oh, God.
Cheater's Monopoly is essentially Killer Bunnies Full Cutthroat, and Full Cutthroat is a strategy I avoid using like the plague. And highly advise against, and will use Full Cutthroat against anyone who uses Full Cutthroat. So, and I will use it better, so therefore it cannot exist. So that's my thought on Monopoly, I guess. I think it's an okay game, but strictly speaking, there is a mathematically correct way to play, which doesn't excite me. I like all the variants of strategies that it's not necessarily this play is correct in Killer Bunnies. It's if I do this play, what strategy does that fall into? In some ways, every play possible in Killer Bunnies could be the correct strategy. In some ways, in theory. It's just, if it's a really bad play, a quote-unquote bad play, a low-value play would be more accurate. It just falls under passive. And maybe it's some new variant of passive that you've just discovered, like purposefully losing the game. That we have that as a strategy on the list. Purposefully losing the game. If that's allowed on the list, then what isn't?
Well, that's the thing. Like, I don't think I've played. I have played it, but I don't think I've enjoyed Monopoly since playing Killer Bunnies, because it's like all of a sudden, oh my goodness, there's games where the negotiation matters, and you can actually change what you're doing based on what everyone else is doing, instead of just rolling the dice and hoping for the best.
Exactly. Killer Bunnies is the penultimate game of social interaction where literally anything could be good. And
Oh, for
there
sure.
are no limits because you can even trade for favors outside of the game. It's just
But that gets toxic.
I in real life I trade for favors in Killer Bunnies. I'm like, I'll sit in the backseat of the car if you give me 10 carrots in the next game. That's the trade
Oh
I
my
made with
goodness.
Frank. We were trying to figure out who's going to sit shotgun on the way to a Perkins run, and Frank's like 10 carrots. I'm like, absolutely. so,
Wow.
so not only do I apply real life to Killer Bunnies, I apply Killer Bunnies to real life.
Wow.
Oh my goodness. Makes it the ultimate game of social interaction when outside of the game you're still negotiating.
Oh yeah, if you're still playing the game when you're not playing the game, then yeah. Oh
That's
yeah.
a good game.
It
That's a
is a
very good
great
game.
game.
Let's cover one more strategy here, I think. I want to cover a combination strategy of 5D chess, which is the neutral strategy that our guest Travis is famous for, where it's rapid transitions between the strategies, and combined with the aggressive strategy of intimidation. And this is actually the strategy that I did when I first tried out the 5D chess philosophy. I actually combined it with Perfect Top Deck. I was actually playing like a triple hybrid, more or less. Not a triple
Oh
hybrid, but
man.
I was combining the Perfect Top Deck with 5D chess, so I was leaning more neutral, and I had that little splash of aggressive strategy in the intimidation. So it gets really exciting when you combine more than two strategies at once. So that was it gets really fun because the thing that the 5D chess person is famous for is that you never know what to expect from them. So you never actually know whether or not they're all of a sudden going to be playing really aggressive or if they'll just start giving away everything that they have. It's really inconsistent. You really don't know what to expect from them. Very, very fun strategy to play. But if you throw that splash of intimidation into there, how much can you get away with?
So how does that even work?
well,
I'm trying to wrap my mind around this.
what essentially becomes if you because 5D chess is famous for uh, extreme transitions, very frequent transitions. If you throw an aggressive strategy into there, or any other strategy, and realistically, all of a sudden the transitions are more narrow, I guess you could say. So all of a sudden, rather than transitioning between neutral, neutral aggressive, and passive neutral, as the 5D chess will usually do, sometimes they'll go into aggressive and passive there. Uh, I'm now transitioning between neutral aggressive, pure aggressive, and neutral. I've shifted my realm of transitions by adding that aggressive strategy that I'm consistently using. So rather than only doing things that people don't expect, I will now also intimidate players that aren't expecting it.
Huh. Interesting. I think I got to see this one in action.
Oh, I've done it once, and that game I think I made a social mistake, I guess you could say, a social misplay, where I went a bit too far on the intimidation side of things, I think. So players actually started retaliating against me because they all of a sudden weren't afraid of me, or at least
Oh,
at least the three players combined as a team weren't afraid. So it's very difficult to balance, of course. 5D chess is a very high skill strategy that I've not experimented with too much. Travis is the expert there, but you can in theory splash in a little bit of a certain strategy, such as intimidation, uh, and then works. It was working very well until I went a bit too far into intimidation and forgot what I was doing.
huh. Interesting.
Yeah, it's an interesting combination. It's the one I'd like to
Yeah.
experiment more with.
Yeah.
I just haven't gotten around to it because I've been using a lot of the hidden investment strategy most recently, and that's
Yeah.
been working really well for me. Now that I've transitioned away from Kinder Protection Services, I am no longer playing as Nazi Germany. There's no longer a need for the formation of a greater bunny circle, and all the Kinder Bunnies should be in the greater bunny circle. That's essentially what it became at some point. And fun fact, upon transitioning away from Kinder Protection Services, a player who had been Travis, who had been manipulated by it and fallen into the lie of that the Kinder Bunny should be protected, I attacked his Kinder Bunny with Feed the Bunny 1 cabbage, and I got a death stare and a rage quit for the rest of the game. The entire rest of the game, death stare. All I did was Feed the Bunny 1 cabbage, and the bunny starved. Death stare. The entire game, and eventually he left. So that's a demonstration of what Kinder Protection Services actually does in its manipulation. But more on that 2 episodes from now when we're talking about aggressive passive.
Should have a toxicity episode.
Like, toxicity.
Yeah, just be like, these are the most toxic strategies we can come up with.
Oh, that gets scary. I don't want to reveal full cutthroat. No, the world is not ready. Oh,
the world is not ready.
The world is not ready. My girlfriend Rachel wanted to see full cutthroats, so I played against her 1 game, and I felt so bad afterwards. It was tearing my soul apart. It's like I felt like Voldemort as I was creating Horcruxes as I was playing it. The bunnies became Horcruxes.
They became Horcruxes. Wow.
Pretty much. It was too toxic. There is such a thing as too toxic.
Oh, for sure. Well, context matters, you know. I mean, if you're playing against somebody who, you want to play again, you can't be that toxic. But if you're playing against people who love the game, and if you're toxic against me, I'm still gonna play with you. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Then maybe you could be a little more toxic.
Yeah. In those scenarios, sure, but I still don't justify full cutthroat.
Yeah.
The story with full cutthroat goes, one player, Nigerian Prince, me into it was a combination of Nigerian Prince and Just War. So then I had 2 players against 1. So I was left with very low economic status after the Nigerian Prince. And I went full cutthroat. 3 rounds later, both of them conceded. 3 rounds. And that's why full cutthroat is not played. Okay. Is there anything else we want to say on neutral aggressive strategy before we close here?
The one we mentioned, I think we categorized it as an aggressive strategy, delay of game. And I just thought about this while we were talking. So I was playing once, and my one buddy, somebody played one of those timed weapons, and I forgive me, I can't remember which one, but if we stalled for 5 minutes, it was worthless. And so me and my buddy, without saying a word, were like, "Oh, hey, she played that card. Have you seen that one before?" Yeah, I think I've seen it, and managed to stall for 5 minutes.
Oh my goodness.
And it was used. I don't remember which card it was though.
Some form of data weapon. I imagine
It was
you were getting
one of the
close to
data weapons.
You're getting close to midnight, where it would roll over into a roll for 1 and several.
Yeah, exactly, and that's exactly what happened. It was beautiful.
Toxic.
Is that? I mean, it's toxic.
That's why we put delay of game in aggressive.
But does that make it more aggressive or more neutral?
It can be, usually with delay of game. It can sometimes be done in a neutral aggressive context. But usually I put it more on the aggressive side.
Yeah, for sure.
Because, no one, in most cases, no one really wants the game to last an extra 2 hours.
That's very true.
Which is usually what we talk about when delay game. It's like, okay, I could play 8 is enough here, and this opponent with 30 carats would be reduced down to 8, and we delay the game by 22 carats. I could do that, and that would be a good play, but we delay the game by 2 hours. So the more neutral play at that point, or even the more neutral aggressive play, depending on how generous you are, is to offer to trade for 10 of the carrots from the opponent to not play it. and that's a fair trade. The delay of game aggressive strategy at that point is to make them lose 22 carrots because you want them to lose 22 carrots. Feels bad for them if they don't want to stay for the game. They can just both concede. I mean, I'm going to stay for the extra 2 hours. That's
Oh, my
their
goodness.
problem. But yes, it can be done in a neutral aggressive context.
Oh.
Okay. Good discussion on neutral aggressive today. Still feels bad that Mikey couldn't join us, but he should be able to join for the next episode, which will be on passive neutral strategy. Somewhat unexplored territory, but quite a few proven strategies there, so look forward to that. If anyone has any topic suggestions in the future or would like to be a potential future guest, we've established that the best way to reach me is by smoke signal or homing pigeon. But the Discord also works, or on Facebook. And thank you, Joe, for guesting today.
Yeah, thanks for inviting me.
Even though we had to reschedule a few times, we got figured out.
Yeah, that's okay, man.
There we go. So, anything you'd like to say, Joe? You get the honors today.
Oh, I get the honor? Jeff Bless.
Jeff Bless.